I'd like to welcome you back to our podcast. We're studying the book of 2 Corinthians in the 6th chapter. Now, the 6th chapter is about ministers. It's about servants of God. Now, you might be saying, well, I'm not a servant of God, so I guess I'll pick you up when you get into verse or chapter number 7. No, you need to understand these are qualifications. Sometimes you might wonder, why is my church growing? Why is my church not growing? Well, this is one of the major reasons. People look at people who are in leadership. And the Apostle Paul, going all the way back to verse number 4, and we're going to pick up at the end of verse number 4, but he says, but in everything commending ourselves as servants of God. The word commending ourselves actually means to set ourselves into a place. Do you know what? We set ourselves. We as servants of God set ourselves. What's Paul doing? Paul is again trying to reestablish his relationship with the church at Corinth, but he's also trying to reestablish his authority to speak to this church as a Christian leader. And so Paul says, you know what? We are commending ourselves. We're setting ourselves in this place called the servant of God. And then he goes on in verse number 4, and we very barely touched on this yesterday, but he says, in much endurance. In other words, we hang in there. We don't quit. The Greek word hupomone means to stand under pressure. We stand. We don't quit. We don't give up. We don't just walk away. How many of you know it's been very easy for the Apostle Paul? He's sitting here in the city of Ephesus as he writes 1 Corinthians. And he's sitting in the city of Ephesus, and he could have said, yeah, just forget it. I've known leaders that have done that. Just forget it. I'm not going to deal with that bunch of people in Corinth. No. Paul set himself in a place as a servant of God by his endurance. He didn't quit. He didn't move out. He stood under pressure. What's the next thing that Paul mentions? In afflictions. The Apostle Paul was in afflictions constantly. Now, this word in afflictions, it actually means to be put under pressure, to be crushed. How many of you know that people can do things to you physically and they don't necessarily have as much or take as much toll on your life as words do? How many of you know the Apostle Paul was constantly mocked? He was told that he didn't have any authority in Corinth, and people were talking bad about him, and constantly under pressure, being crushed by words, being crushed by actions. He was stoned. He was beaten. He was thrown in prison. But you know what Paul says here? He says, because I didn't quit, because I stood in that place of being crushed, I am proving to you that I am a servant of God. Crushed. What happens when someone says something bad about you? You stand, you quit, proving to be a servant of God. The next thing, in hardships. Whew. Now, some people believe that Christians aren't supposed to be in hardships, but hardships come. What does it mean? It means being opposed. It means someone standing against you. The word hardship, it's a compelling force that's against you. You know what? One of the things that you're going to learn in ministry, and you're going to learn it in life, not everybody likes you. Get over it. Just get over it. Oh, they don't like me. I'm going to quit. No. Don't quit. Stand. Stay. You see, all of these things that Paul mentions here, all of them work together. Patience was the first one. Standing, enduring. Well, they don't like me. Well, get over it. Not everybody's going to like you. And that's what Paul, when he says here, hardships, he's talking about people who stood against him. Who stood against him, who opposed him. Now the Apostle Paul goes on. And the next thing that he says, in distress. The word distress here means a narrow place. Have you ever felt like you were just being boxed in? You know what? When people say things about you and they're attacking you and hardships are coming and people are doing things to oppose you, you're going to feel like you're in a hard place. You're going to feel like that they're limiting me. I can't work here anymore. I can't minister in this town anymore because they're limiting me. It's something that's going to happen to a servant of God. And listen to me, servants of God. If you give up in times where you're feeling distressed, you're feeling narrowed in finances, narrowed in emotional support, narrowed in whatever area of your life, you know what? Hang in there, because it's going to prove you're going to commend yourself as a servant of God. The next thing, beatings. It means strikes. It means blows, wounds, injuries. The Apostle Paul proved himself. He proved himself by being beaten. You know, can you imagine that here comes Paul and he gets stoned. He's left for dead. And the next day he walks up to his traveling companions and says, "Hey, let's go." Can you imagine what happened in the hearts of those people? They said, "Hey, I'm going to follow this man." I've been around people that have been persecuted for their faith. And you know what I say? I want to follow him. I want to do what they do. I want to get into their head and find out what makes them what they are. And it's the grace of God. But not the grace of God being used in vain, but the grace of God at work on the inside of them. Again, going back to the Apostle Paul, when God said to him, "My grace is sufficient," he's talking about relieving the thorn in the flesh. And personally, I believe he's talking about persecution. We need to understand that as servants of God, we put ourselves in a place where we are commended, where we are seen, we are set apart from other people by what we go through. And we're going to continue tomorrow on this list. So join us tomorrow. Thank you for watching.